Hi, Raman. I'm doing the fundamentals course, so I just have a couple of questions about that, and I want to make sure I understand the conflict of interest stuff. So, my first question is, if I'm representing a seller, and let's say it's at an open house and an unrepresented buyer comes in and
Right.
they do want to write an offer. So I
Yeah.
know that I'm supposed to disclose that I'm representing the seller, and I
Mm-hmm.
would get them to sign a customer agreement form. At what point am I telling the sellers about this?
Yeah, let me walk you through that. So basically, what happens is when you are in that situation where you're representing the seller, you're doing an open house on behalf of the seller, and a buyer comes in without an agent and wants to write an offer on it. So you would do the same thing. You would give them the consumer relationship guide and then explain the different types of relationships, and then you would get them to sign customer acknowledgement form. So in this case, because they are your customer, there is no conflict of interest, right?
Okay,
Because you're not giving them advice, you're not giving them any confidential information or your opinion on things. What you would do in that scenario is if they ask you, okay, how much should I write the offer for? You can say to them, okay, there are 3 properties or 4 properties that sold in this area in the last month. These are the prices that they sold for. These are the comparables, right? And you can give them information about those properties. And now you can ask Mr. Buyer, what would you like to write the offer for, right? So
okay,
you are not giving your opinion, you are giving them information based on which they can make a decision, right? So
right,
you can fill out all the forms for them, you can, write the conditions that they want included in the contract. So you can do all those things, you're just not giving them advice, right? Because
right.
you're not representing them, you're representing the seller. But you can fill out all the forms and write the offer and then take the offer to your seller. But there is no conflict of interest disclosure that needs to happen here because there is no conflict. You're only
Right.
working on behalf of the seller and the buyer is a customer. So this is the same thing as if another agent brought the buyer, right? So that buyer would be considered your customer. So there's no conflict of interest. Okay, so let me explain a scenario where there would be a conflict of interest. Okay,
Okay.
so let's say different scenario where you have listed a property for a seller. Okay, at the same time, you have a buyer that you have been showing properties to. You already have a buyer representation agreement with this buyer, and you've been working with them, showing them properties. And then you listed this property for a seller, and it could be a potential good fit for this buyer. So you share the listing with them, and the buyer says, I want to take a look at the property. You show them the property, and now they're interested in writing an offer on the property. Okay. So in this scenario, it's a conflict of interest because you already had the buyer as somebody you were working with as a client. And then you also have a seller now who is your client. So now that's a conflict of interest because they're both your clients, right?
Right.
So in this scenario, you would have to do disclosures on both the sides. And then if both parties agree, then there's a form called agreement to represent the buyer and seller, both the buyer and seller, right? And it has the disclosures in there as well. So it will say, okay, this is the relationship you can have now, which you become a transaction facilitator. It will tell them what that would look like, right? So you can't give advice, you can't, give one person's confidential information to another. You cannot share information with one versus the other. You have to share information with both parties. So that's the time when there is a conflict, when you already previously have a buyer and it's your listing that the buyer wants to write an offer on, which is your client. So because they're both your clients to begin with, that's why. So that would create a conflict, and then the disclosure needs to happen, and then you sign that agreement, to represent both buyer and seller, which is your consent form. And then you can become a transaction facilitator. And your job in that case is to get them to come to an agreement, to have the buyer and seller come to an agreement.
Okay. That makes sense. Thank you.
Sorry, if I would like to interrupt for the same scenario.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead
Um,
then.
yeah, as you said that if there is a conflict between buyer and a seller, but
Mm-hmm.
then she can disclose the information. But after
Yeah.
that, the commission would be going to the one person only, so
Both.
she can both like what? Because she'll be sole agent.
No. In which scenario? If there's a buyer and seller, sorry, the buyer is a client.
Yeah, when you the second scenario which you gave, that the buyer
Yeah,
and the seller both are the client of one person, one agent,
yeah.
because she's a sole agent.
Interest. Yeah, so it's a conflict of interest, right? So that's why she would have to do a disclosure, get the consent, and then you become a transaction facilitator. And basically, you cannot give your opinion to one versus the other. You're just sharing information with both parties equally, and you are passing what one person wants, right, to the other, and vice versa. So you're just facilitating the trade. You're not giving them any kind of confidential information. You're not giving them your opinion. You're not working on behalf of one person versus the other. Your main role in that case would be to just help them come to an agreement.
Okay, so basically doing the administration for both sides, that's what you
Very
said.
much. Yeah.
But this is the first scenario. The
That's
second
not
one, when you
that's the
no?
second scenario. Yeah. In the first scenario, all you're doing is there's no conflict of interest because the person is your customer. And
Okay.
you are giving advice to the seller in that case. You're not giving any advice to the buyer. All you're doing is the paperwork, right? Whereas in the second scenario, you're doing something similar, but you're going beyond that because they're both your clients. So you cannot give confidential information of one to the other. So the role is in the actual application of it is similar, but the situations are different. And
Yeah, that's what I asked.
form
Suppose
versus
there is conflict, but the conflict has been disclosed between both parties.
yeah.
So then the commission which is coming, because sometimes it's been splitted, between two agents from
Yeah.
seller and buyer. So now at this moment she is a sole agent. So the commission is
So it
going to her.
doesn't, so the commissions will be the same in both the cases, yes. So the one agent that's involved will get both sides of the commissions in both
Okay, yeah.
scenarios, right? But in first scenario, you're actually giving your advice and opinion to the seller because you're representing the seller. In the second scenario, you're not giving any advice or opinion or anything like that to either party.
Oh, okay. I understand now. Okay. Thank
Mhm.
you so much, Raman.
Hey, you're welcome.